Captain Maya Rodriguez stood at the boarding gate of the Celestial Dreamer, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, trying not to laugh at the increasingly flustered Zacian security officer. The tall, crystalline being's faceted eyes kept shifting between her bag and the holoscreen, all four hands tapping different control surfaces. "This can't be correct," the officer muttered, their crystalline structure taking on a worried purple hue. According to regulations, a passenger for a 3-month cruise should have at least 4 primary luggage units, 6 entertainment modules, and a minimum of 3 formal attire packages. Maya shrugged, a gesture that made the officer's crystal segments click anxiously. "I travel light. Everything I need is right here." She patted her bag, causing a metallic clinking sound that made the officer's hue shift to an even deeper purple. But the regulations clearly state. "Check subsection 47B, Maya interrupted with a grin. "Special allowances for species with non-standard packing requirements." "I did my homework." The security officer's fingers flew across multiple screens, and their color slowly returned to a more neutral blue. You are correct. Though this is highly irregular." They gave her bag one final suspicious scan before reluctantly waving her through. As Maya walked down the pristine white corridor toward her cabin, she couldn't help but notice how every surface gleamed with almost obsessive perfection. The Zaxians were famous across the galaxy for their order, their precision, their unwavering adherence to rules and regulations. It was exactly why she'd chosen their cruise line for her vacation. Well, vacation might not be exactly the right word. Maya's cabin was exactly as advertised, a perfect cube, 10 meters on each side, with every amenity placed according to what she assumed were countless studies on optimal spatial efficiency. She tossed her bag onto the geometrically centered bed and pulled out her personal tablet, quickly scanning through the ship's approved passenger activities schedule. 0800, synchronized meditation in the Harmony Chamber. 0900, lecture on proper waste disposal techniques. 1000, organized viewing of star cluster 7249. 1100, guided tour of hydroponics bay, no touching. Maya's grin widened. The schedule continued like this for all 72 days of the cruise, every minute planned, every activity regulated, every possible variable accounted for. Except one. The ship's intercom chimed with perfect pitch. "Attention passengers. The Celestial Dreamer will begin departure procedures in exactly 47 minutes. Please ensure all personal belongings are properly secured according to Regulation 35C. Emergency protocols can be found in your cabin's information terminal, subsections 12 through 847. Maya sat on her bed and began unpacking, a set of modified engineering tools, carefully designed to look like standard grooming implements, a handful of what appeared to be ordinary entertainment chips, reprogrammed to interface with Zacian systems, and her prized possession, a universal adapter of her own design that could connect to virtually any standard port in known space. She wasn't here to cause trouble, not really. But after reading about the Zaxians' famous cruise line and their perfect record of 0 incidents, she couldn't resist. Humans had a saying about perfect systems that the Zaxians had apparently never heard: the more rigid the rules, the more interesting the loopholes. The ship's AI announced the beginning of departure procedures with precise timing. Maya felt the subtle vibration of the engines powering up, each one activating in carefully calculated sequence. She pulled up the ship's public schematics on her tablet, already noting several interesting optimization opportunities. A soft knock at her cabin door interrupted her planning. She quickly hid her tools and opened it to find a young Zacian crew member, their crystalline form shifting through nervous shades of green. "Captain Rodriguez? I'm Junior Entertainment Coordinator 6-427. I've been assigned as your personal liaison for the duration of the cruise." They consulted a holopad. "According to our records, you're the first human to book passage on a premium-class Zacian cruise vessel. We want to ensure your experience meets all regulatory standards for satisfaction." Maya smiled warmly. "That's very thoughtful. And please, call me Maya." I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting journey together. Zix 427's color shifted to a cautiously optimistic blue. Excellent. Your first scheduled activity begins in exactly 42 minutes. Would you like me to escort you to the Harmony Chamber for synchronized meditation? Actually, Maya said, picking up her tablet, I was hoping you could tell me more about the ship's environmental systems. I noticed some fascinating design choices in the public schematics. Oh. Zix 427's color flickered uncertainly. That's not on the approved discussion topics for passenger-crew interactions. No. Maya pulled up a specific section of the regulations on her tablet. But according to Article 15, Section C, Paragraph 7, passengers are entitled to all non-classified information pertaining to their immediate environment for safety purposes. And since the environmental systems directly affect the air I breathe. She watched with amusement as Zix 427's crystalline form cycled through several colors while they processed this interpretation of the rules. This, Maya had learned, was the key to dealing with highly regimented species like the Zaxians. They followed their rules absolutely, but they rarely considered how those rules might interact with each other in unexpected ways. Finally, Zix 427 settled on a resigned shade of pale blue. Your interpretation is, technically correct. I can provide a basic overview of the environmental systems during your scheduled free period at 1,300 hours. Perfect. Maya smiled. I look forward to learning all about them. As Zix 427 departed, Maya returned to her tablet, adding notes to her growing list of observations. The Zaxians had built what they considered a perfect system, with every rule supporting every other rule in a grand, interconnected web of order. But they'd never had to account for a human in that system before. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was finding the spaces between the rules, the possibilities that arose when different parts of a system interacted in ways their creators had never imagined. Maya lay back on her geometrically centered bed, grinning at the perfectly squared ceiling. The Zaxians were about to learn a valuable lesson about the difference between perfect systems and perfect order. And she was going to have a wonderful time teaching it to them. 3 days into the cruise, Chief Operations Officer VYX-892 stared at the report on their holoscreen with growing alarm. Their crystalline structure flickered between deep purple anxiety and angry red as they read through the list of incidents for the third time. The first had seemed innocent enough. The human passenger had simply requested to adjust the temperature in her cabin. But instead of using the standard comfort request form, available in triplicate at any information terminal, she had somehow accessed the environmental controls directly and created what she called a dynamic temperature gradient that adjusted automatically based on her activity level. When questioned, she had cited no fewer than 7 different regulations that, when combined in ways no one had ever considered before, apparently made this perfectly legal. That was just the beginning. The ship's pristine hydroponics bay had been reorganized to what the human claimed was 43% greater efficiency, by ignoring the traditional geometric arrangements in favor of something she called companion planting. The plants were thriving, much to the confusion and dismay of the botanical staff. The standard issue entertainment pods in the recreation deck had been modified to interact with each other, creating what she termed a multiplayer experience. Worse, other passengers were actually requesting access to these modified versions instead of the properly regulated single-user systems. And now this latest report. Enter, VYX-892 called as their office door chimed precisely on schedule. Junior Entertainment Coordinator Zix 427 entered, their usual blue professional hue tinged with stress-induced green spots. Report on the human situation, VYX-892 commanded. Captain Rodriguez continues to operate within technical compliance of all regulations, Zix 427 began, their color shifting nervously. However, her interpretations of these regulations are becoming increasingly creative. Explain. This morning she organized what she called an impromptu jazz session in the Harmony Chamber. When reminded that unscheduled musical performances violated Regulation 47D, she pointed out that the chamber's intended purpose was, quote, the creation of harmonious vibrations to enhance passenger well-being. She then proceeded to demonstrate how jazz, through its mathematical properties, qualified as harmonious vibrations. VYX 892's crystal structure made a sound suspiciously like a groan. And the other passengers? 17 different species attended the performance. The Voraxians, particularly, seemed quite moved. They've submitted a formal request to include jazz harmony sessions in the regular schedule. Denied, VYX 892 snapped. The schedule was perfected over decades of careful study. We cannot simply. They were interrupted by a priority alert on their holoscreen. The message was from engineering, marked urgent but not emergency. VYX 892 read it with growing horror. She's in the engine room, they whispered. How did she even get access to the engine room? Apparently, Zix 427 consulted their notes. She discovered that her status as the first human passenger technically qualified her as a unique xenological specimen. According to Regulation 183b, such specimens are granted supervised access to all non-critical ship systems for research purposes. She argued that since the engine room has multiple redundancy systems, it cannot be classified as critical under the strict definition of Regulation 15-7. And engineering allowed this? Chief Engineer CAX 756 reports that her suggestions for optimizing the plasma flow regulators are intriguingly efficient. They're running simulations now. VYX 892's color drained to a pale, stressed white. This is precisely what we were warned about. Humans don't just ignore rules, they reshape them. They find connections and possibilities that no sane species would ever consider. And somehow, they make them work. A new alert flashed on the screen. VYX 892 read it and their crystalline form actually crackled with stress. She's submitted a formal proposal to establish a passenger innovation committee to explore, quote, potential synergies between various ship systems and passenger experiences. The proposal cites 23 different regulations, Zix 427 added helpfully. All technically applicable. And she's already gathered support from passengers representing 12 different species. We must do something, VYX 892 declared. The integrity of our systems is at stake. Our perfect order. Another alert interrupted them. This one was from the ship's efficiency monitoring system. VYX 892 stared at it in disbelief. Overall ship efficiency has increased 17% since implementing Captain Rodriguez's suggestions, they read aloud, their voice faint. Passenger satisfaction ratings have increased 24%. Energy consumption has decreased 12%. Perhaps, Zix 427 ventured carefully, some degree of controlled chaos might not be entirely. Don't say it, VYX 892 interrupted. We maintain order. We follow regulations. We do not embrace chaos. As if in response to this declaration, the ship's public announcement system activated. Instead of the usual precise, measured tones, the sound of what humans called swing music filled the corridors. Somehow, Maya had found a way to override the standard announcements while still technically complying with all communication regulations. VYX 892 watched through their office viewport as passengers of various species began moving differently through the corridors, some actually swaying to the rhythm. Even a few crew members were failing to maintain their usual rigid posture. Send out a priority notice, they ordered Zix 427. All crew members are to review the complete regulations database immediately. We must find a way to contain this innovation. Zix 427 suggested. Chaos, VYX 892 corrected firmly. Before it spreads any further. But as they watched a dignified Voraxian elder attempting to teach a quantum crystalline being what appeared to be a dance step, they had a sinking feeling that it might already be too late. Somewhere on the ship, Maya Rodriguez was probably grinning. The celestial dreamer shuddered in a way that even Maya knew wasn't normal. She was in the middle of showing a group of fascinated quantum crystallines how to play poker, using regulation-compliant meditation cards, naturally, when the first tremor ran through the ship. The overhead lights flickered, something that, according to at least 15 different Zacian regulations, should have been impossible. Warning, the ship's AI announced in its perfectly modulated voice. Anomaly detected in local spacetime fabric. All passengers please report to designated safety zones according to Emergency Protocol 7249A. Maya was already moving, her cards forgotten. She'd memorized the ship's layout during her first week aboard, including all the maintenance tunnels that were absolutely off-limits to passengers, except when citing Regulation 183B, her personal favorite. She reached the nearest engineering access panel just as another tremor rocked the ship. The panel slid open before she could hack it, revealing a startled-looking Chief Engineer CAX 756. Captain Rodriguez, they began, their crystalline form shifting rapidly between emergency red and regulatory purple. This area is strictly. Let me guess, Maya interrupted, bracing herself against the wall as another shudder ran through the ship. Strictly off-limits except in cases of emergency, as defined by Regulation 92C, subsection 4, which specifically includes unusual spatial phenomena that may impact ship systems. She grinned. I did a lot of reading this week. Before CAX 756 could respond, a priority alert flashed across every screen in the corridor. Maya caught a glimpse of complex equations and energy readings that made her engineer's instincts scream in alarm. We've encountered a quantum fold in spacetime, CAX 756 explained, their professional training temporarily overriding their regulatory concerns. Our standard protocols should allow us to navigate around it within acceptable safety parameters. The ship lurched violently, sending them both stumbling. Warning lights that Maya hadn't even known existed began pulsing along the corridors. Warning, the AI announced, still perfectly calm. Standard evasive protocols unsuccessful. Initiating secondary emergency procedures. Maya followed CAX 756 into engineering, her mind already racing through possibilities. The massive chamber was a hive of activity, with Zacian engineers moving in precisely choreographed patterns between workstations. Under normal circumstances, it would have been impressive. Right now, it looked like a dance routine on a sinking ship. The anomaly is growing exponentially, one engineer reported. Standard containment algorithms are proving insufficient. Implement Emergency Protocol 7249B, ordered CAX 756. Already attempted. Failure rate 99.97%. Protocol 7249C. Projected failure rate 99.99%. Maya watched the holographic display showing the anomaly's growth. The Zaxians' responses were perfect, precise, and completely inadequate. They were trying to solve a chaos problem with order. You're thinking about this wrong, she said, earning several shocked looks. The anomaly isn't following any regular pattern, it's pure quantum chaos. You can't counter it with programmed responses. Our protocols are based on extensive research and historical data, CAX 756 objected, but their tone held a note of uncertainty. Another violent shudder ran through the ship. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Historical data won't help because this exact situation has never happened before, Maya argued. You need to improvise. We don't. CAC 756's crystal structure actually crackled with stress. Maya moved to the nearest engineering station, her fingers flying over the controls. Look at these readings. The anomaly is reflecting our energy patterns back at us, but with quantum uncertainty added. Every time we try a standard response, it learns and adapts. We need to be unpredictable. That's completely against all operational protocols. Your protocols are making it worse. Maya pulled up the ship's power distribution grid. We need to create our own quantum uncertainty. Random power fluctuations, intentionally chaotic shield harmonics. Fight chaos with chaos. Chief Operations Officer VYX-892's voice cut through the growing debate, absolutely not. We cannot abandon our protocols. They are the foundation of. The ship's AI interrupted, warning. Structural integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 12. Standard containment failing. Time to critical failure, 15 minutes. Maya looked directly at CAX 756. Your protocols were perfect for a predictable universe. But right now, they're going to get everyone killed. Sometimes you need controlled chaos to survive. For 3 precious seconds, no one moved. Maya could practically see the conflict playing out in CAC 756's crystalline form, absolute adherence to regulations versus the undeniable reality of their situation. Finally, they spoke, show me what you need. The next 10 minutes were unlike anything the Celestial Dreamer's engineering deck had ever seen. Under Maya's guidance, the precision-trained Zacian engineers learned to improvise. They introduced random variables into shield harmonics, created intentionally chaotic power fluctuations, and essentially turned their perfectly ordered systems into a quantum jazz performance. It's working, someone called out. The holographic display showed the anomaly's growth slowing, then beginning to recede. Of course it is, Maya said, not looking up from her calculations. Sometimes the best response to chaos is to become just a little bit chaotic yourself. Controlled chaos, she added with a grin at VYX-892, who stood watching with an unreadable crystalline expression. The key is knowing when to use it. As the anomaly finally dissipated and emergency teams began assessing the damage, Maya noticed something interesting. The Zacian engineers, still running their improvised chaos protocols, were moving differently. Their usual rigid precision had been replaced by something more fluid, more adaptable. And not one of them had cited a regulation in over 12 minutes. We will need to update our protocols, CAX 756 announced, their tone suggesting this was perhaps the most radical statement a Zacian had ever made. To account for unpredictable situations. I might have some suggestions, Maya offered. All strictly within regulations, of course. Just, creatively interpreted. She could have sworn she saw VYX-892's crystal structure ripple with what might have been, just possibly, the Zacian equivalent of a suppressed laugh. The aftermath of the quantum anomaly incident sparked changes throughout the Celestial Dreamer that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Maya watched with growing amusement as the ship's perfectly ordered routine developed what she liked to call productive wrinkles. It started in engineering. The team that had worked with her during the crisis had discovered that their new, chaos protocols could improve efficiency in normal operations as well. They began experimenting, carefully, methodically, but experimenting nonetheless. The concept of controlled chaos spread through the department like a particularly energetic virus. Captain Rodriguez, chief engineer CAX 756 approached her one morning in the now modified dining hall, where tables were arranged in what Maya had convinced them was a mathematically optimal randomized pattern. We've been analyzing the data from our recent innovations. Maya hid her smile at CAC 756's careful avoidance of the word chaos. Some habits died hard. And what have you found? Our new adaptive algorithms have improved engine efficiency by 32%. Power consumption is down 27%. And they paused, their crystalline form shifting through several analytical shades of blue. Workplace satisfaction among engineering staff has increased by an unprecedented 45%. Because they're allowed to think creatively now. Because they're allowed to think differently, CAX 756 corrected diplomatically. However, we've encountered an unexpected problem. Other departments are requesting access to our new protocols. Maya raised an eyebrow. That's a problem. It's unprecedented. The hydroponics team wants to apply chaos theory to plant growth cycles. The entertainment division is discussing something called improvisation workshops. Even the custodial drones are requesting random pattern upgrades. Their crystal structure flickered with concern. The ship's organizational structure wasn't designed for this level of interdepartmental innovation. Sounds like you need a new organizational structure, Maya suggested. One that can adapt to change while maintaining essential order. Before CAX 756 could respond, they were interrupted by an unusual sound, laughter, coming from the direction of the Harmony Chamber. They found a group of junior officers attempting to teach a traditional Zaxian geometry dance to a mixed group of passengers. The rigid, precise movements had somehow evolved into something far more fluid and expressive. This is technically a violation of at least 7 regulations, CAX 756 noted, but their tone held more curiosity than concern. Is it though? Maya grinned. According to Regulation 47b, cultural exchange activities are encouraged when they promote understanding between species. And Regulation 183c states that physical movement exercises should optimize passenger well-being through coordinated activity. You're doing it again, CAX 756 accused. Finding spaces between the rules. The spaces between the rules are where growth happens, Maya replied. Look at them, they're not ignoring the traditional dance, they're building on it. Adding new elements while respecting the original structure. Controlled chaos. Throughout the ship, similar transformations were taking place. The medical bay had begun implementing what they called adaptive treatment protocols, combining traditional Zaxian healing techniques with ideas from other species. The results were impressive enough that even the most conservative medical officers had to acknowledge their effectiveness. The ship's AI, originally programmed for perfect consistency, had been authorized to introduce small variations in its announcements. Passengers reported that its newly developed personality made them feel more comfortable interacting with ship systems. Even the notorious Chief Operations Officer VYX 892 had begun to adapt, albeit in their own uniquely Zaxian way. They'd created a new classification system for authorized variations from standard protocol, complete with risk assessments and innovation metrics. It was possibly the most ordered approach to chaos ever devised, but it was progress. The passengers are responding positively, Zix 427 reported during one of the now daily innovation assessment meetings. Nobody dared call them chaos reports. Satisfaction ratings have reached unprecedented levels. We've received booking inquiries from 17 new species for future cruises. And the crew? VYX 892 asked, their crystalline form shifting through analytical patterns. They're adapting. Zix 427 displayed a series of charts. Efficiency is up across all departments. Stress levels are down. And we've seen a 73% decrease in citations for regulatory violations. Because we've modified the regulations? VYX 892's tone was carefully neutral. Because we've learned to work with them rather than just follow them, Maya suggested. You haven't abandoned order, you've made it more flexible, more resilient. She gestured to the viewport, where the stars streamed past in their eternal dance of cosmic order and chaos. The universe isn't purely ordered or purely chaotic. It's a balance of both. The most stable systems are the ones that can adapt while maintaining their core structure. The ship's intercom activated, playing a subtle background melody, one of the AI's new features. Maya watched as several crew members unconsciously adjusted their movements to the rhythm, their usual precise gestures taking on a more natural flow. We're going to need to update a lot of training materials, VYX 892 noted, but there was a hint of anticipation in their tone. Think of it as an opportunity for innovation, Maya suggested with a grin. Later that evening, Maya stood in the observation deck, watching the modified hydroponics bay through its transparent ceiling. The plants had been rearranged into spiraling patterns that somehow managed to look both chaotic and perfectly ordered at the same time. A fitting metaphor, she thought, for the changes spreading throughout the ship. A group of passengers gathered nearby, representing at least 6 different species. They were engaged in what the Zaxians now officially classified as a spontaneous cultural exchange session, what humans would simply call a party. The music was a fascinating blend of traditional Zaxian harmonies and other species' influences, creating something entirely new. Maya smiled as she watched a young Zaxian officer attempting to teach a Varaxian elder the mathematically precise steps of a traditional crystal dance, while the Varaxian simultaneously demonstrated their species' more fluid movements. The resulting dance was neither purely Zaxian nor purely Varaxian, but something unexpected and beautiful. Controlled chaos in motion. On the final day of her 3-month cruise, Maya stood in the Celestial Dreamer's Grand Observation Lounge, watching the Zaxian home world grow larger in the viewport. The crystalline planet sparkled like a perfectly cut gem, a fitting home for a species that had elevated order to an art form. But the ship approaching it was no longer the same vessel that had departed 3 months ago. Neither was its crew. Captain Rodriguez? A familiar voice drew her attention. Junior Entertainment Coordinator Zix, for 27, though not so junior anymore, having been promoted to head of Adaptive Passenger Experiences, a department that hadn't existed 3 months ago. Just Maya, remember? She turned to face the Zaxian, noting how their crystalline form now shifted through colors more freely, no longer bound by the rigid emotional protocols of their species. Ready for the final presentation? The High Council is somewhat concerned about our proposed changes to standard operating procedures. Zix 427's colors rippled with what Maya had learned to recognize as suppressed amusement. Particularly the section about embracing productive uncertainty. Let me guess, they're worried it might lead to chaos. They used the phrase, potentially catastrophic disruption of established order, 17 times in their preliminary response. Maya laughed. Then it's a good thing we came prepared. They made their way to the ship's main conference chamber, now redesigned with what the Zaxians called optimal asymmetry, a concept that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. The room was packed with ship's officers, corporate executives, and members of the Zaxian High Council, their crystalline forms creating a rainbow of nervous colors. Chief Operations Officer VYX 892 stood at the presentation podium, their forms steady and confident. Distinguished council members, they began, 3 months ago, the Celestial Dreamer embarked on what we thought would be a standard cruise. Instead, we discovered something far more valuable, a new way of thinking. The holographic display activated, showing side-by-side comparisons of the ship's performance metrics before and after what the crew had taken to calling the innovation period. Efficiency up 47%. Passenger satisfaction increased by 89%. Emergency response effectiveness improved by 124%. VYX 892's crystal structure glowed with pride. And most importantly, not a single regulation was actually broken. We simply learned to see the spaces between them. One council member's color shifted to skeptical purple. But the reports of unauthorized modifications, all fully documented and classified under the new Adaptive Innovation Protocols, VYX 892 interrupted smoothly. Which, you'll note, comply with all existing regulatory frameworks while allowing for controlled evolution of procedures. Maya hid her smile. They'd spent weeks helping VYX 892 craft that particular regulation, ensuring it provided official sanction for productive variance within established parameters. It was possibly the most Zaxian way ever devised to officially approve of breaking the rules. The presentation continued, showing footage from throughout the cruise, the quantum anomaly incident, the transformed hydroponics bay, the new entertainment programs. But more striking were the before and after images of the crew themselves. The rigid, mechanical movements of the before footage contrasted sharply with the more fluid, confident motions of the after scenes. We are not suggesting abandoning order, VYX 892 concluded. We are proposing enhancing it. Making it more resilient through controlled adaptation. More perfect through carefully managed imperfection. A murmur ran through the council members, their colors shifting through various shades of consideration. The head council member rose, their crystalline form radiating authority. This is unprecedented. With respect, honored one, Maya stepped forward, unable to resist one last bit of creative interpretation. According to historical record 7249b, the founding of Zacian civilization itself was unprecedented. Your ancestors chose to impose order on chaos, creating something new and remarkable. We're simply suggesting the next step in that evolution, learning to work with chaos instead of just trying to eliminate it. The council chamber fell silent. Maya could almost see the concepts battling in their minds: tradition versus innovation, stability versus growth, order versus chaos. Finally, the head council member's color shifted to a deep, thoughtful blue. The data is compelling. And the regulatory framework is sound. They paused. Perhaps it is time for our civilization to embrace a more adaptive approach. The ripple of color changes through the chamber suggested this was as close to enthusiastic approval as Zaxians could get. Maya caught Zix 427's eye and winked. Later, as the crew gathered for Maya's departure ceremony, itself a departure from standard protocols, being more celebration than formal procedure, Chief Engineer Cax 756 approached her with a data crystal. The first draft of our new engineering training protocols, they explained. We're calling it the human factor, understanding controlled chaos in system design. We hoped you might review it. Maya accepted the crystal with a smile. Planning to unleash this on all Zacian ships. Eventually. Though perhaps with slightly more controlled implementation than your methods. Where's the fun in that? Maya grinned. Though I suppose starting small is its own form of controlled chaos. As she prepared to board her departure shuttle, Maya took one last look at the celestial dreamer. The ship still gleamed with Zacian precision, but now there was something else there too, a hint of flexibility in its perfect order, a suggestion of creativity in its mathematical beauty. You know, VYX 892 said, approaching for a final farewell, there's an old Zacian saying, perfect order is the foundation of existence. And now? Maya asked. Their crystal structure rippled with what was definitely amusement. Now we're considering adding a second part, but life exists in the spaces between. Maya laughed. That sounds suspiciously like controlled chaos. Indeed. VYX 892's colors shifted through a complex pattern of appreciation. Though we prefer to call it regulated innovation in official documents. It's more orderly. Precisely. As her shuttle departed, Maya watched the celestial dreamer grow smaller against the crystalline backdrop of the Zacian home world. The ship's new motto, written in both standard text and Zacian crystal script, caught the light of the system's sun: order through adaptation, progress through understanding. She smiled, remembering the nervous security officer who had greeted her 3 months ago, so concerned about her single bag and its mysterious contents. The Zaxians had worried that humans would bring chaos to their ordered world. They'd been right, in a way. But sometimes a little chaos was exactly what order needed to become something greater than the sum of its regulations. Maya pulled out her tablet, already drafting ideas for her next vacation. She'd heard the Symmetrians of the perfect cube cluster were even more obsessed with order than the Zaxians. She wondered how they felt about jazz.